Our first speaker, Keith Tilley, is well known, I think, to many in the business continuity world. He's probably got over 40 years hard-edged experience within the industry, working more recently as Executive Vice President for SunGard with global responsibilities for their sort of strategy marketing of their products. He's got wide experience beyond that, and I think in recognition of some of that experience, he received a lifetime recognition award from CIR Business Continuity sort of magazine. So Keith is with us today at the front. So without more ado, I'll see if I can work the technology and
go. Lifetime Achievement Awards just means I'm old. Okay, right. That's about all it means. What we're just doing with the technology, first of all, thanks to Andrew and Fortress and to you for allowing me to come to speak. I'm fairly passionate about business continuity. I suppose I should be after 40 years of doing involvement in it. But I think it's just as relevant today as it has been in the past, and I'll try and explain that. Although mine's about the history, I will try and bring you up to date as to what I've seen, what the companies I've worked with and companies like Fortress have seen as we go further forward. And also, I will touch on what I think some of the future would be. Whenever I'm asked to speak, I always like to look at the audience that is coming to the event to understand what their motives are for it. So I did actually look up on your website as to what your mission statement was, and I'm sure you can recite this in your sleep, right? There was a word in there that I believe is true for every industry, whatever it is, but is also key when it comes to some of the things that we talk about when it comes to business continuity, and that's really the word excellence. Right? Okay, very simple business definition, dictionary definition. Quality of being outstanding. I like that bit, or extremely good. Excellence. Right? To me, business continuity planning, and there's a lot of you in this special interest group, so you know this already. It's about making sure that you can prevent and recover. And when I started, it was all about disaster recovery, and it's morphed into the business continuity and availability. The ability to prevent rather than react, but you have to be capable of doing both. So to my mind, if you're in charge of facilities management, that excellence has to include business continuity. As David said, what I've seen over the years, disaster recovery started within the IT department, and that was it. Right? It was how do we recover the IT? Recovering IT on its own does not get the business going. Hence the change to business continuity. As soon as it does that, it involves people, it involves facilities, and the ability to be able to work in extenuating circumstances. So I think if you are members of a professional body that has excellence in their title, then this is something you should be pushing for. I actually think if it is now becoming part of your remit, certainly business continuity, disaster recovery is now high level, board level. They want to know about it because their reputations and reputations of the businesses they operate for is in some of your hands because they expect you to be able to get that business continuity right. And we all see the effects of when something goes wrong, the damage it can do, the credibility. It's still a fact that companies that do not have business continuity plans, if they have an incident, will statistically over 50% go out of business within 18 months after having an incident. Fact. Right? And I've always preached that no company cannot think about business continuity. They might decide they can't afford it, they don't want to do it, but to actually say, I don't think about it, they're completely wrong, because something will happen, for sure, from that perspective. But, where did the history of business continuity start? And for work area in particular? Well, now we get into real technical stuff. Right? Is there anybody from the FA here? I heard they might be here. There's somebody from the FA. Apologies for this. This isn't anything. I've got to work this magic little cursor.
The cursor's up on the TV screen.
Is it? Ah, that's why I can't see it down here. Look at this. I'll explain why it's relevant. That's got to be the most interesting penalty I've ever seen. Right? What the hell's it got to do with work area and business continuity? Well, there's a couple of things in there, for instance. Both the goalkeeper and that kicker would have practiced. Practice. Testing is a must. Testing for people as well as the IT is a must. But what you can never do when you test is really recreate what happens at the day it happens. What's the ground like? What's the crowd like? How are you feeling when you take the penalty? The other thing there for the goalkeeper is, the goalkeeper was doing work area recovery, standing his goal, but then he decided to go and remote work. And obviously didn't realise that something else was happening in the background. And that's also what happens. You can have a great plan in place, but I guarantee you plans will never execute 100% because you have to deal with the eventuality of what's happening at that time. There's another link between that because, believe it or not, Wembley was the location for the very first commercial work area recovery site within the UK. It was a collaboration between the company Comdisco that I worked for at the time and Barclays Bank. So somewhere in front of Wembley there was the business park, and there was a building in there that Barclays owned, and they decided they needed recovery, and they decided they wanted to go into commercial relation with somebody else so that they could reduce the cost of that, and this was a property they had. So we fitted out a whole floor in one of the buildings to be the first ever work area recovery contract. And the customer's questions at that point would be, what happens if I invoke on FA Cup final day because I'll never be able to get there, and stuff like that. Yeah, again, things happened. All right. The great thing about Wembley at that time was actually you could get there fairly easily. There was lots of parking, there was good communications lines, and there was good transportation lines. And when it comes to people, those kinds of things are very important to us. But the fact is, okay, that was happen chance. Barclays wanted to have some work area recovery, didn't want to do it themselves, saw Comdisco as being an ability to do it. Why though? Well, at the time there were things happening that were making people realise that people could not carry on in their work in a normal way. So you had Bishopsgate, you had Manchester bombing. Right, these were at the forefront of what people saw as being potential interruptions to their business, and therefore how do I overcome them? Interesting enough, in the iterations I've got, I work with a number of companies affected by both those. The Manchester bombing, Royal Sun Alliance was one of our customers. And if you remember, the Manchester second bombing, there'd been a previous bombing just before, which didn't do so much damage. And RSA had actually replaced all their windows in the building, which you can see there, with bomb-proof windows, or bomb-proof glass, I should say. When that bomb went off, the glass worked, but the frames didn't. So the actual blast of the bomb through the planes of glass right the way through the office, from one side to the other side of the building, taking everything with it. Now, there was nobody in the place when it happened. But again, nobody thought about that. Bomb-proof glass sounds like a good idea. Didn't bother to check from a facilities point of view what the window frames were capable of taking that kind of blast. So this is how workplace became, because workplace is all about how data flows through a business. Because wherever data flows through a business and touches, if it's changed, then you've got to be able to record at that point in change so that you can pick it up and recover back to it. One of the best examples I can give of that is, again, going back to the early days, and this is how old I am, is when you moved into the area of telephone, before internet, telephone ordering. So a very known insurance company with a red telephone, right, had fantastic IT plans for their recovery. But the point is, their whole business wasn't based just on IT. It was based on the fact that somebody could contact you. And if you couldn't get through to them on the phone, they lost the business. So they were one of the first people who actually said, we need some kind of recovery for our people just as much as we do for the IT. The IT started to be a given, a tick, expected. The business continuity for the front pass wasn't. So wherever the business has information that touches it is where you need to think about, does this need to be secured? If it's touched by a computer, you need to be able to back that up and recover it. If it's touched by a person who makes some type of decision, then it needs to be dealt with. Ryanair do a lot through the internet, but they still have a lot of telephony. When they look at their systems, they saw it from a point of view of, yes, their two critical systems are actually not booking the flights. Their two critical systems are airport, from a point of view of being able to tell where the planes are so they can turn around, and pilot time. Because if you can't prove to civil aviation how long your pilots will be flying for, you can't fly. They take a pragmatic view when it comes to taking orders. They will take an order over the phone, but one of their priority systems is not to actually take the payment, believe it or not, out your credit card. So from a recovery point of view, the fact that, yes, they normally take it straight away, but if they have to wait an hour or two, so what? Right? If they couldn't take the order in the first place, they've lost it. So therefore, they prioritise the front part of it, not necessarily the next part. And that's what work area is about. Where does it touch the people, and how do I make sure that that can be recovered in the right elements. So, workplace has been born out of that need. You will see when Andrew does the tour around here what a modern workplace recovery looks like. But in principle, it is that home from home. The ability to work in a similar environment where the view out the window might be slightly different. But you have to be able to work, you have to be able to plan. Now, as I say, there is this element of, okay, how does that fit in with technology? And there are some things that are like technology and some things that are slightly different. The big difference is actually to do with people. So, servers, cloud, mobile, fine, right? There are many techniques to back that up and be able to recover the data. One of the key things we found when we first started opening up in Wembley was that telephony at the time was very key. The ability to talk to people. And again, it's one of those that can't emphasise enough. Buncefield. The Buncefield disaster, remember the oil depot that blew up? And Northgate. Northgate was one of the customers of the company I worked for at the time. Interesting enough, just a sidebar to that, that happened on a Sunday, right? Which is, it's interesting, the majority of disasters happen on a Friday or a weekend. Don't know why, but they do, all right? Just strange sort of coincidence. The first bombing of the Twin Towers was a Friday, right? When they drove the car underneath and tried to blow the whole building up. And the guy who did that got caught when he went back to get the deposit for the van. I don't understand that, but that's the truth. Right? The terrorist got caught by saying, I want my deposit back. Buncefield happened on a Sunday morning. 12 hours before that blew up, they held their Christmas party for all their family and friends in that building, right? So if the incident had happened 12 hours before, we'd be talking about it for a completely different reason. But the interesting thing about that was when that happened, it was so massive news. One of the problems they had was everybody was phoning everybody on their mobile phones. Are you okay? What's going to happen? The disaster recovery people couldn't talk to each other because they were just getting busy signals all the while. And one of the little things they did was they gave their DR people different phones to their normal phones. And if you think about it, what happens to staff that you have in your buildings? If something happens that is well known on the news, they are going to phone up and say, are you all right? They're not phoning up and say, is the business all right? Are you all right? So there's little things like that. Telephony is very, very important, whether that be mobile, just to keep in touch with the people, or whether it's a telephony as part of where you do the business. The other thing that's important, and I'll come back to this when I talk about where I think this is going in the future, is home working and things like that. People working together create more productivity than working apart. There's a LinkedIn article 2 days ago. IBM are now saying to over 2,500 of their remote workers that they can no longer work workers. In fact, what they've said is you either become permanent employees in the office or you find another job. Because they've factored in that productivity increases when people work together. I would actually say when there's been an incident, it's even more key that people work together because you're having to deal with things that are out the ordinary. And it's far quicker to be able to say, okay, what do we do here? How do we do it? So the old crisis team together, but even people working together, that ability to feel that camaraderie when something's going on and pull together. Household International, who were in the Twin Tower centres on the 90th floor in that first bomb, they came out of their building and they had to stand in front of a camera and the CEO had to say, yeah, we've been affected. But we'll be back and running on Monday because we have a recovery plan. Their business increased by 60% for the next month after that. Now, their investment of individual people's wealth management. So I think that some people sat down and thought, by God, if they can recover from that, that's a place I want to put my money in. And good recovery business plans actually return on investment to the bottom line as well. A lot of your bosses might see it as just an expense. It's not, right? A lot of your business might think it as an insurance. It's not. It's a service that provides real benefit to keep your business going and can add real value to the bottom line. If you look at it a little bit more, and these are some of the examples of what's happened over the years. Over the last 10 years, there's been 413 invocations in the UK for work area compared to 313 on technology. So there are more invocations now on work area than there is on technology. Fact. In fact, there's been a complete reduction in IT invocations. 90% reduction in IT invocations. Now, again, you can sit here and go, yeah, I get that because hardware's become more reliable. So therefore I expect it. I'll put it into the cloud. We've got some redundancy. So I kind of get that. It's still pretty bad when it goes wrong, right? But I can understand that. In the last couple of years, the main reason for invocations of work area has been because of power. So they've put up a number of reasons why we need to be vigilant. It is cyber. There's big threats out there, but it's the mundane stuff that will trip you up more often than not. On average, still within the UK, there's one invocation every week across all the suppliers. That's what goes on. Interesting enough, shipping to site of hardware for technology has increased, which suggests that although technology has become more resilient, a lot of it's been outsourced, but the stuff that remains in is not as well protected as people thought. So I've outsourced, I've got nice SLAs with people. My internal is maybe where I cut the corners a little bit. Top issue above power is actually communications. That's been down to telephony or just data communications going wrong within the building. And that's caused the invocations. So it's not as much I can't get in the building, it's something's happening to the building. All right? Now, there have been some strange ones over the year. I think they mentioned about the police cordon. One invocation we had was a result of a murder inside an office block. You probably read about it. One of the female staff was followed in by somebody and killed by an ex-partner inside. So the whole place was secure. Couldn't get in. All right? There were no communications issues on technology that caused invocation during 2016. Not at all. Again, if you think about it, most people, technology, yeah, I've got 2 internet connections, I've got this, got this, got that, right? And therefore they haven't been able to do it. So there is a difference between the reason why people invoke workplace to why they invoke technology. They're still very important. Other things. Now again, for those of you who have this as a responsibility, this is be teaching you to suck eggs almost. But you know, whether it's workplace or whether it's technology, you still have to define what you're trying to do. From a point of view of, you know, which of the people are the critical, need to recover, need to tier the applications, tier what the people are doing. It's all about recovery time, recovery point. You know, it's the same when I started with IT, you would go and say, right, what systems are running on this, which ones do you need up first, where's the interdependencies? You'd be amazed that people forget about the interdependencies. I need this up, but that has one file from this over here that I didn't think was important, so it can't work. It's the same for the people. And you just basically tier it. You know, as a consultant, if you're doing recovery planning for an office and says, okay, who's in here, HR, marketing, etc. Okay, when do these need to be back up, da 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 da. If you have an event and almost like 6 weeks later you're still saying that department doesn't need to be recovered yet, I'm not sure why you need a department that can't be recovered in 6 weeks. There's got to be some kind of priority. The other thing that's changed over the years is companies have shrunk down their workforce, and therefore the critical mass of people has become greater. So whereas when we first started there'd be, hey, I've got 100 people in this building, I need to recover 25, yes, 100 people's gone down to 60, but I now need to recover 60% of those. Because more people, I'm sure you're the same, less people are doing more work, and therefore the critical nature of what they're doing needs to be recovered. So percentages have changed. So you tier the application, you tier whatever the department is doing. You apply changes. One of the first interesting things that Barclays found, because obviously they were one of the first customers we put in here, was, okay, it was very traditional PC at the time. So you had to take PC images. They found that they had something like 15 images across the whole of their business. Now that made it very complicated to recover. So they decided they would create 3 images only, kind of basic, mid-tier and advanced. As a result of that, they went and said we only need to provide 3 types of PCs. They reduced the cost of their supply of PCs down by having standard builds. Something came out of recovery, that came into recovery, that came to help the bottom line. But also, that's what you do. You know, it's no good having something that you can't recover if it's critical to your nature. Obviously, you align environments, whether it's technology, whether it's people. You know, how many of these people do I need to recover? What type of things do they need on their desk? Is it just telephony? Is it just a PC? Is it a dumb terminal because I'm going to the application back on the cloud? Whatever. This is where dedicated seats become important. Again, one of the things I've seen over the years is we never had dedicated seats when we first started doing work area recovery. It was all shared. Then people realised that there was a balance of risk here, that they needed to get some dedicated. And now the vast majority of companies, particularly in the financial services side, will take some form of dedicated as well as shared. There are still one or two who only take dedicated. Right? That's very costly, right? But they've made that decision. But this is one of the changes that we've seen. I've already mentioned documenting, testing. Testing is important, right? Repeat testing. It's very hard to test if you've got a whole building of 100 people. So it's basically cycling. Have different people doing it each time. But you must test because people will be working in a different environment. I'll come back to that in a minute. Anything you can automate through any software packages or through your internal is just going to help you improve. And obviously, you've got to manage for continuity. In other words, things change. When you have a change process, then usually it's going to have a knock-on effect to any recovery, and that needs to be built in. Building recovery in to a process at the end costs more than embedding it into the first place. So we always encourage people to say, hey, it's not the case of you test, you get ready, you put it on the shelf and leave it. You continually improve, because that way you can be assured of being able to recover. As I say, this works across there. Big difference is people, which I'm coming on to now. So it's to maintain the ability to carry on doing a business. And as I said, when people have interruptions, it really, really does affect their business from that perspective. So again, one client that I had at one point is probably if there's any salespeople around here, this is probably the best example. We went to give a sales presentation to the CEO and the CFO and the business continuity person for this firm that did, at the time, a lot of online banking and online loans. And so we were quite open and said, hey, we think you need to have some kind of business continuity. And the CEO stopped within the first 5 minutes, just turned to the CFO and said, how many loans do we do per hour? He was able to say this many at this value. How many of those people have repeat business? 60% have repeat business. So you tell me, if I lose an hour, not only have I lost X, but I've lost 60% of repeat business. How much is your subscription? It's X. Thank you, end of meeting. Where do I sign? Right? But that person got right to the heart of it, which is, I lose this business, and in this day and technology, as us as customers are completely promiscuous, we'll just move from one business to another. We don't really care. But if we get good service, we'll stay. So I'll buy this, it's going back to EasyJet and Ryanair. I'll book a flight Ryanair. If it's fine, that's my first website next time, and my first website next time, and my first. If they screw up, I move to EasyJet. I just want to get to Budapest. I don't care. And then suddenly, that becomes my number one to go to. It's the same for these sorts of things. That's why it's important that we carry out. So our duty is to do that. The differences in workplaces to IT are really all about people. Psychological considerations. As I said, the majority of incidents are pretty mundane, so people do not get bad up about it. Oh, we've had a bit of a problem with the power. I've got to go and work out of this office over here today. If it's an incident such as Buncefield, if it's an incident such as terrorism, that is not their number one concern. If it's a flood, it's not their number one concern. Their number one concern goes back to Maslow, and it's me, my family. I need to make sure they're all right before I even think about the business, and you have to consider that from that perspective. As I say, luckily, those types of incidents, such as 7/7, 9/11, don't happen that often, but they can have a hell of an effect. It still amazes me how companies don't look at home locations. Yes, we have everybody working in this centre. I'm going to put the recovery centre over there, and all their staff work to the east. And suddenly, their travel becomes impossible. Dropping the child off for childcare to get to work, I can no longer do. So therefore, there are considerations that technology, you can put data subject to data protection rules. You can put data anywhere you want in the world. You can't put people's roles anywhere you want in the world. It doesn't work. You have to consider those. Changing the workplace staffing requirements, there's been a lot of change, as I say. The percentages have changed. Less people doing more work means greater percentage need to be recovered in these sorts of environments. Transport becomes very key. Right? One of the biggest problems in 7/7 was the transport network closed down. So therefore, you have this view of, well, how do I make sure the staff can get home and get back to wherever they need to? So companies involve other areas. Some companies will get to this place here and we'll bus you there and we'll get you back. Those sorts of things need to be taken into consideration. London, it says London specific. This was some research that Continuity did some while ago. You could put any city up there. Cities tend to have some specific issues because it comes down to concentration. I'm sure Andrew will touch onto that as well, which is, a single incident can cause quite a lot of problems, so you need to be aware of how that affects. And that is why you get some people who prefer inside or outside the M25 type environments. Some people prefer to have both. You know, I know Fortress have this location, but they can partner with somebody down in Kent. That's actually not a bad solution, because if there was a big problem in London, you might not want to be in London. You might want to be somewhere else. So you need to consider those when it comes to larger cities. The future. What's the future need for workplace recovery? My last company did a little bit of research into this and asked some questions. Where do you see workplace recovery? Where do you see offices in 10 years' time? 60% of the people said there'll always be a need for some form of work hour recovery. Actually, 28% said the demand was increasing. I think what they meant was what I said there, the percentage of the staff is increasing because I've got more critical staff. I don't have this excess anymore of people. Only 12% said they don't think it'd be required. And clearly coming in here today, all the people building the offices, I think there's a large majority think that offices are going to exist in some form or other for a long time to come. And if offices exist for us to be there, to do our jobs, then recovery needs to exist as well. I don't know whether Nick or anybody else is going to talk about this, but there's going to be some talk about this. Right? Now, as Andrew knows, I could go off now to a whole deluge about my BT home line and how perfect it is, and now if it ever gets upgraded, considering I live right next door to the frigging exchange, right, I'll be a happy man. I think I'm going to break into that. But the point is, you all would have worked at home from some point, right? You all know the challenges that you get there. As I said, there is other challenges that you don't see outside of it. I think, I am maybe an older person who believes that people getting together generate far more power than they do individually spread out. That might not be the case if you're programming a little bit of code somewhere. But the difference between most businesses these days is they have a competition, and it's the knowledge and wisdom that people bring to the data and information they have that makes the difference. And you only get that when you collaborate and you bounce ideas off each other. And I'll come on to the way that's going to change in the future more. Security. How do you check the security at home? How do you know that I've not just wandered off and my 10-year-old kid who's more whiz on the PC than me hasn't just gone in and hacked something on there? How do you know? How do you make it secure? Health and safety. You're responsible if they're working from home. If they trip over and kill themselves, somebody's going to sue you probably because you didn't do the right risk assessment because you demanded they go home to work from home. It wasn't their choice. You put it in the plan. You work from home. That's why you see some people say, hey, you go home, but don't work. Literally, we don't need you, HR department, for a week or two, or marketing department, because we've got this incident, but we don't want you to work. All right? Communications. I love this. Communications. I'll come back. Actually, I'll save that one for later. Collaboration. When do you need to talk the most? When things are working well, or when things aren't working so well? When things aren't working so well, you need to talk. You need to talk quickly. You need to make decisions very quickly. And the plan, I'll go back to the plan. The plan is great. Chicago flood, many years ago, was caused by, they were putting a new bridge in Chicago. They drilled through into the old tunnels that used to carry the coal underneath the river to heat up the offices, which were then full with communications cables. No more coal, communications cables. So all the high-rises were filling up with water from the bottom. Now, a traditional plan that had for one of our customers was, oh my God, you've got to evacuate, you've got to restore from your backups. They had enough time to physically remove disk drives and take them up. What do you go? Well, that's not in the plan, so I'm not going to do that. No, you take advantage. A good plan is executed 90% of the time, and you spend a lot of effort on the 10% where the unique situation means you can do better than the plan says. You can only do that when you're collaborating together in the same room. And test. Test, 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 test. If there ever is anything, if people get bored with testing, they don't understand the benefit of it. Okay, now we talked about communications. Let's work from home. If there's a crisis, let's go home and let's collaborate. Well, let's see how that works, shall we? Apologies for those who've seen this before. We laugh because it's true, right? Imagine that in a disaster, right? People talking over each other, people pressing mute, dogs, kids, babies. It just doesn't work, right? So, unless you have a process where you are working from home normally, and therefore an incident is not abnormal to you, that doesn't work, right? So that's my argument as to why we need it going forward. What we look like in 10 years' time? Well, there's all sorts of conjectures about an office, right? A lot of it comes down to collaboration, the ability to work together and talk together. And this is what it's going to mean. And it is about that knowledge. It is about knowledge. Using the data to be able to make the best decisions. That's what's going to differentiate companies from each other, I believe. Whatever business they're in. Talking and making things happen. Whether it's a new Apple Park or whether you have these private pods, I don't know. But the point is, right, as I say, there's always going to be a need for it. And as I say, some companies are coming away from this home working for certain environments because they believe it's going to be a better solution. So we've come a long way. Wembley's come a hell of a long way from that perspective. All right. So is disaster recovery planning. It's kind of like full now, plan, alternative locations, good facilities such as Andrew's got here. All right. So, in some basic ways, it hasn't changed. Technology behind it has changed. The need for it, I believe, remains and is potentially increasing. And the need for people to collaborate, particularly when there's incidents, right, is greater than it probably ever have been because we rely on that technology so much now there is nothing to go back to, so therefore we need to be ahead of it. So on that note, thank you very much. If there's any questions, facilities management, do you know where the air conditioning is? Right.
Thank you very much indeed, Pete. We'll see what we can do air conditioning wise. Yeah, would you?
I'm sorry.
Thank you. Yeah.
It was getting hot.
Double out now for no extra charge. So some interesting perspectives there without any shadow of a doubt. Making us all stop and think, home working I think features in an awful lot of our plans to one degree or another. So, tested in reality or not. Our next speaker, Nick Sims, has got an awful lot of operational experience. Over 25 years gained in a variety of industries, working at the front line of business continuity, dealing with a range of incidents. He will list them off, I'm quite sure, but from DDoS attacks to hurricanes to terrorist threats and incidents. That's the day job. He also sits on the British Standards Committee, which helps put together some of the standards that we use day to day, ISO 22301 being a good example. He's currently working in the London Ambient Service, trying to help them put together a sensible continuity plan to deal with situations like the 99 service, the systems that support that failing. So a different perspective with some similar themes, I suspect. So, Nick.